What is up? Welcome to Every Single Guitars, where the goal is to review every single guitar ever made. Today I have another vintage Gibson. This is a 1960s, a mid-1960s. I believe it's a 1963 or a 1964. It is a Gibson LG-1. Smaller body acoustic guitar. It's actually pretty funny because I've owned this guitar in the past. Not this specific guitar here, but I've owned a 1958 Gibson LG-1. So it's like, you know, like 6 years difference, like 6 to 8 years difference. So in terms of, you know, first impressions, I can't really give you my first impression because I've already played this guitar in the past, but not this specific guitar. But in 1963, 1964, that's over 50 years old. That's when my dad was born. So basically when my dad was 1 year old, this guitar was fucking made. Old as fuck. So, you know, for every guitar review I do, I always do the first impression, which is the weight. How heavy is the guitar? How does the guitar feel in your hands? You know, when you pick up a guitar, is it really heavy or is it super light? For this particular guitar, I'd say it's on the lighter side. If I had to guess a weight, I'd put it around 5 pounds, 5.5 pounds. It's pretty light. But at the same time, it's a smaller body guitar. It's not a dreadnought. It's like kind of like a Parlor OM-ish type of guitar body. So, you know, obviously it should be lighter than a bigger size guitar. First impression, I got this guitar last night. I purchased it off, I don't know if it's a retired musician. To be honest, a lot of the guys that I buy my gear from are musicians who seem like they're not pursuing music anymore. That's why I can get really good deals off them. He told me that he wanted to sell this guitar because he was looking for a newer guitar, like a newer Martin, and he said he's owned this for over 10 years. He actually said this guitar was in his family for, you know, over a decade. So I mean, I trust his word. You know, there's a lot of superficial things, scratches. There's a lot of checking on the surface. You could clearly tell that this guitar is fucking old. I mean, it's a 64. I reviewed a 53, or I forget, it's like an early 50s or mid 50s Gibson L48, which is an archtop guitar. And that guitar is older than this, but condition-wise, this guitar is in worse condition than the older 50s Gibson that I reviewed. But I think that was a unique case because I've never seen a 50s Gibson in that great of a condition. So that was just a anomaly. I think for a 50-plus-year-old guitar, you know, this type of wear is pretty common. You know, checking, you know, dings. You can clearly tell that this is old as fuck and it's been played. But apart from the superficial wear, structurally the guitar is very solid. I don't get the sense of, you know, it breaking down. Sometimes I've played guitars from the 70s and 80s, which are much newer than this, and they were in far worse condition. Like when I picked it up, you know, those guitars, it just felt very flimsy. You know, in terms of this specific guitar, it is very solid, well constructed. So a brief history of the Gibson LG-1. I didn't do too much research on it, but this was released as a, you know, kind of like a lower entry student model back when it first came out. So, you know, if you bought this guitar in the 50s or 60s, this was like the student, you know, base model that Gibson provided for the market, which is pretty funny because, you know, nowadays if you see current student type guitar models, you know, there's like the Taylor Big Baby or you know, the Martin X series from, you know, made in Mexico. I've played those models before, especially like the Big Baby model for Taylor, and dude, this is just a much superior quality guitar in terms of just the wood they use, you know, just the stability of the guitar, The Taylors, the Big Baby Taylors, it's a good guitar. It's a good guitar to, you know, practice and kind of noodle around. And if you're like starting to play the guitar, it's a good guitar to start out with. You know, if you compare that entry-level guitar to this LG-1, which is an entry-level guitar, I mean, this is just, there's no comparison. You know, I kind of wish I lived in the 50s and 60s and bought this, because, dude, for an entry-level guitar, this is pretty incredible. But at the same time, you know, Gibson is, you know, one of the greatest guitar companies ever made, ever established. Same with Fender. So, you know, I'd say that it kind of makes sense why the quality would be much higher, especially, you know, older Gibsons. You know, rumor is that Gibsons from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and onward, the quality control was much better. That's what I always hear. I feel like that is the case because, you know, a lot of the older Gibsons that I've played that are over 20, 30 years, the quality was just much better. And it's the same thing for this guitar as well. So for the other guitar reviews I've done in the past, I've been getting some flack in the comments by some of my viewers. They're like, oh, you just talk about the guitar, you explain about the guitar, but you don't play it. Well, for those guys who say that, this is for you. I will play this guitar right now. To be honest, the tone is very good. I like the tone of this guitar. So overall, very good sounding guitar. So like I said, you know, a mid 1960s Gibson LG-1. For a 50-year-old guitar, I say that this is typical. This is for a 50-year-old Gibson or Martin or some other acoustic guitars that have that kind of age. I'd say that this is very typical of a guitar like that. You know, checking on the surface of the guitar, you know, couple dings, some superficial scratches, you know, some marks on the back. But as long as the stability and the structural quality of the guitar is good, I don't really care. I could tell that these bridge pins are not original, as well as the nut, because it just looks way too white. And I actually feel like the last owner, he tried to color the nut with like a brown markerish to kind of give it that hue. And when I saw it in person, I could clearly tell, but I didn't really call him out for it because, you know, it wasn't really a big deal to me. As long as, like, you know, there's no cracks on like the headstock, or there's no like repairs done to like the body, and like, you know, things that are clearly that could affect, you know, the sound and the playability and also the resale value of the guitars. As long as those things are not present, for me, you know, I really don't care. You know, these things are all minor. And if you're a guitarist, I'm not a professional guitarist by any means. I just play for fun. But, you know, as long as it doesn't affect your playing, I feel like it shouldn't make a big deal. It shouldn't make a big difference. For my last Gibson LG-1 that I've sold, it was a late 50s Gibson. There was this old guy who came to look at the guitar, to check out the guitar. I think he was like in his 60s, and he was like, oh, there's like checking on the front, there's like scratches here, and he's like the nut width it's like 0.3 off. And he was being like really just, I mean, I get it, like if you're into guitars, like, you know, everyone has their own preferences, but he was just Like, I told him all the details in the ad, and he was just asking so much unnecessary questions. You know, like doing this, like checking the neck if it's straight, which you should. But, you know, I feel like for me personally, for those people who do that kind of stuff, it means you're probably an expert, you know, with guitars, with setting up guitars, with playing guitars. But then I asked him, like, hey, sit down and play the guitar. Like, you know, you've been checking it out for like 30 minutes. Like, you haven't even played it. And he played it, and dude, he couldn't even play the instrument. He was just like basic G, you know, like really offbeat. I'm not trying to hate on his musical ability, but I could clearly tell that he was not even close to decent at the guitar. And this dude was like all like so anal about stuff like this. I'm just like, bro, you gotta know how to play the instrument if you're gonna do all that kind of like nitpicky stuff. And I just told him, like, yo, like, I'm done. Like, I'm not trying to waste my time with you, and I just left. But that's just kind of a side rant. You know, for a 50s or for a 60s guitar, like I said, you know, checking things like that is a typical of a guitar this old. But stability wise, it's still very good. Overall condition for this specific guitar, I give it like a 7 out of 10. It's like over 50 years old, so there's, you know, some visible marks and wear and tear. Tone, I give it like an 8. Sounds good. 1950 or 1963, 64, Gibson LG-1. Great guitar.